they couldn't sell beer. I heard that basic refrain multiple times when talking to folks about the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks. In my conversation with Skyhawks radio analyst Tony Ains, he was quick to point out the lack of revenue from beer sales.
My guess is it wasn't financially viable anymore, especially with the beer issue.
Yes.
If you think about professional sports, pro football, you got to be able to sell beer,
yes.
right? And it wasn't Todd Turner, I believe, the athletic director at NC State.
I believe he was at that time.
And he just said, no, we can't do it. They called it an on-campus facility, which Carter-Finley really isn't an on-campus facility, as we know. But those were the rules. Those were the university's rules, that they weren't going to sell beer on campus property or a facility that is owned and run by NC State. And, that not only, as you noted, that kept the crowds down, but, that's a revenue piece that's really difficult to replace.
In my conversation with George Habel, former CBC president of the sports group, he was still sort of flabbergasted by how everything that could go wrong did.
One of the behind-the-scenes problems was they couldn't serve beer.
Yes.
You really can't do sports without beer.
They tried to give away beer once.
I was sort of in on some of those conversations. Because we would have been looking for a beer sponsor.
Of course.
But Todd Turner, the AD at NC State at the time, was under a lot of pressure as the stadium negotiations went on to serve beer. But, I remember he told me this will never happen. I mean, that wasn't Todd's opinion. That was an administration thing.
Sure.
They were not going to serve beer in 1991 in Carter-Finley Stadium. For a pro football game. That really does have an impact on people's enthusiasm for your product.
Yes.
And then they were just terrible. I mean, it was a meteoric failure. I mean, they talk about failing fast when you're doing something new.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened with the Skyhawks. They failed fast.
The Skyhawks could not win, and they could not sell beer at Carter-Finley Stadium. While marketers couldn't do anything to fix the losing, there was an attempt to put pints of beer in the hands of fans.
The Triangle has the most unique landscape for sports. 3 major universities along Tobacco Road with rabid fan bases, a Stanley Cup champion, an NFL team right down the road, and heavily invested transplants. Not to mention an interesting mix of sports teams that were. Joe Ovius brings you a brief history of Triangle sports, a candid conversation with those who help shape why sports matters here.
Alcohol at college sporting events, up until a few years ago, was always a delicate dance in hypocrisy. Back in 1991, without a special exemption, the sale of alcohol was not allowed at public university facilities. You could always tailgate with your own booze before the game, and universities would hold private events where alcohol was available, but there was no public sale. The Skyhawks tried to work around those rules using the private party angle ahead of a Monday night game at Carter-Finley Stadium. Bruce Hatcher, a local promoter at that time, was hired by the team to throw a party. They got a band, they got the beer, and anyone with a ticket to the game would receive 2 vouchers they could exchange for some crispy boys. This did not go over well with NC State.
8 games into their first season, the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks have lost 8 games. Team officials are worried, both about the record and about the fans who are coming to the games in smaller numbers. With just 2 games left, the team wants to build for next year, on the field and in the stands. The Skyhawks are planning a party for Monday's game, complete with free beer for 2,000 fans.
The state ABC board has approved the promotion that I want to do, and the management of it's all intact.
But there's a problem. NC State athletic department officials don't want alcohol served at the party before the game. Hatcher says those officials are being hypocritical.
With our football games at Hospitality Village is sold as a corporate package, which includes alcoholic beverages and bands and food. I just don't feel this is a very fair effort for NC State not to try to make things work.
NC State Athletic Director Todd Turner says it's different. Parties at the stadium where alcohol is served are private with a guest list.
That's quite different than having a public event where everyone's invited and alcohol or beer in this case is distributed free of charge. It's just that goes against the university's attempt to try to control the alcohol problems that might exist out at the stadium.
Neither Turner or Hatcher are sure how all this will turn out. The Skyhawks will play at Carter-Finley this Monday. The team still says it will have free beer outside the stadium. NC State still says they won't. Attorneys and a court may have to decide the dispute that could affect negotiations between the team and NC State for future seasons at Carter-Finley Stadium. Chris Fitzsimon, WRAL-TV 5 News, Raleigh.
Turns out the Skyhawks were able to serve free beer at that game. But if you caught on to any themes with the Skyhawks, there was a problem. You can plan a pretty party, but you can't predict the weather.
Rain was the last thing the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks needed for their next-to-last game. Filling the stadium has been one of the team's hardest challenges this season. This time, rain made the challenge even tougher. To draw a few more fans, promoters even gave ticket holders free beer. These folks say the offer was worth getting a little wet.
It'll bring the people out for once or twice, and they can see the team play, and then they'll get the hang of going out watching them play.
Critics say high ticket prices and competition from local college sports have made it tough for the Skyhawks to draw big crowds. Of course, the team's 8-game losing streak hasn't helped either.
It would bring more people in if they would do more wins.
In good weather, an average of about 13,000 fans come out to these games. The question is whether that's enough to keep the Skyhawks in the triangle. Fans we talked to say the team just needs a little more time.
I think that it's going to be strong. It's just going to take a while for everybody to get used to the new league. It's going to do good, I think.
These football fans just hope it doesn't take too much longer for the Skyhawks to score big with the rest of the Triangle community. Angela Hampton, WRAL-TV 5 News, Raleigh.
So why the hurdles to serve beer? The simple answer is politics. You got to remember, up until a few years ago, you couldn't get a mimosa for your Sunday brunch until it was noon. It's a relatively new concept here. Consider North Carolina still had a dry county as of 2020. But with politics, sentiment will change when money enters the chat. And as the business of college sports grows, administrators are always looking for new revenue streams. Beer, literally and figuratively, is something they could tap into. The 2016 ACC tournament in Washington, D.C. is notable because it was the first basketball tournament where beer was sold. Then you have Wake Forest, a private institution. They were an early adopter in the state when they introduced limited beer sales during football games the same year. Tim Kent is the executive director of the North Carolina Beer and Wine Wholesalers Association. It's his job to lobby on behalf of brewers. I asked whether one in-state school, like Wake Forest selling beer, was the final push for state laws to be changed. But the answer, as with all things politics, wasn't so simple.
Probably around 2017.
Okay.
2019. I don't think it was driven necessarily by Wake Forest, but there were a whole lot of things going on. So let me give you a long answer to a short question.
I love long answers.
Okay? So North Carolina has always had this tortured relationship with alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to the days of Prohibition ending. North Carolina didn't come out of Prohibition until 3 years after the Federal Act. We were the second to last state in the Union, second only to Utah, to agree that we're going to allow the sale of alcohol. And then a whole lot of safeguards were put around it.
Mm-hmm.
In order for there to be alcohol sales, individual counties, individual cities had to approve the sale of alcohol, either for beer and wine, either for on-premise or off-premise purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So you had all these local option referendums that went on throughout the state for about 4 decades. And then fast forward, it wasn't until 1979 that liquor by the drink was approved in this state. One city and then others followed.
Okay.
It was all through local option. Governor Jim Hunt, his first 2 terms as governor, that would be 1976 to 1984, he did not allow alcohol to be served inside the governor's mansion. Okay. Now, what's the common denominator here? Politics.
Yeah.
It's not wanting to offend your political allies and for alcohol to become a liability to your political future. So that's how we got here. But then we had some other things going on. Dean Smith was an outspoken opponent of alcohol being allowed in sports venues.
Mm-hmm.
He issued a statement in 2006 to the NCAA saying that all beer ads should be ended abruptly now on all college sports broadcasts. And Dean put out a statement which included this quote: "Presidents of colleges have to have some courage. You can't limit alcohol in college sports. You have to get rid of it." So that's how we got to where we are going into 2010.
The Dean Smith part is interesting because I remember in my college years, Carolina had an ad campaign in the late 90s called Don't Get Wasted. So while Dean Smith was very anti-alcohol advertisements and alcohol on college campuses, college students drink. And alumni who come back for these events, whether it's just a random Saturday or a homecoming, they drink. Fundraising opportunities. I don't know about you, Tim. I know your background. There's a good way to get money out of people at fundraising events. Liquor them up, right? So how was this balanced? Because in my research for this podcast, poor Todd Turner, right, the AD at NC State at the time, because he also had to balance that dichotomy of, at my events, they were private events in tents outside Carter-Finley Stadium, etc. But for your events, you cannot do the same thing. These are alumni events, they're fundraising events, etc. We saw this with the development of the Blue Zone at Keenan or Vaughn Towers at Carter-Finley Stadium. Oh, I can have beer and alcohol in these parts of the building because they were privately funded through donations, but you, the masses in the crowd, you cannot. So there's been a long-standing hypocrisy when it comes to this.
Oh, for sure. And all these college girls, putting a pony bottle in their Uggs boots. I mean, that's been going on forever.
You mentioned it. Carter-Finley Stadium is famous for, in its urinals, having a sign that says, "Do not flush mini bottles." So they know that people are drinking on campus. But who really got the ball rolling on beer at college stadiums?
2011, the University of West Virginia. Mm-hmm. Brand new athletic director Oliver Luck, better known as the father of Andrew. Mm-hmm. He became the athletic director. He was informed by alcohol law enforcement authorities, "Sir, you have a big problem here at this stadium. There's a lot of drunken people creating a lot of problems. They're going in and out, and you really need to do something about it."
Yeah, not West Virginia where they burn couches. Not at all. No.
So West Virginia kind of put a baby toe into the water and started selling beer at football games. And they didn't have great problems. They did it under the umbrella of trying to reduce binge drinking and trying to discourage all the going in and out at halftime. And they make some money off of it. Texas soon followed. Mm-hmm. Texas, by the way, is the biggest beer selling state in America.
Not surprised.
Okay, so other states have followed, and some smaller colleges did this for the money reason. They needed a revenue stream to get people to come to the football game between Austin Peay and Troy. All right, we're going to serve beer, so
makes sense.
They'll make a little bit of money on the side. Mm-hmm. So that's how we got to about 216, and Wake Forest jumps into the alcohol sales business. And then other things started to happen.
The rest starts to follow. So I'm curious, when we get to 2019, which was the first season in which you could have beer sales at Carter-Finley Stadium. I'm pretty sure Keenan was slow to announce that it was going to happen, but it did happen. But what were the biggest hurdles to get the start of beer sales for public consumption in 2019?
Well, the traditional hurdles involved academics worried about sending the wrong message to college kids, law enforcement not being able to police who the beer is being handed to after it's been sold, the Christian Action League, which has always played a role in North Carolina politics. They were very, very concerned about the message that it was sending, having underage kids around beer, etc. The legislature changed over the last 10 to 12 years. We have a Republican legislature in this state, and a good number of them are not just free market individuals, but they're highly skeptical of arguments that somehow we're hurting the children of this country.
Okay.
So there were a number of legislators who really wanted to do this. A couple people who were Carolina grads and a couple who were East Carolina grads, and they got together and passed the first bill, which allowed the sale of one beer per person, per time, at a college football game. And that started in 2019. And 2 years later, the original bill was somewhat amended to allow the sale of 2 beers per person per time. And that's where we're at today.
A brief history of Triangle sports will continue after this break. One of the arguments in favor of selling alcohol at college sporting events was related to the idea that it would curb binge drinking. Now, if you exclude the idea that college kids are going to be college kids from this discussion, the idea makes a lot of sense. If I'm tailgating and I know I can buy a beer in the stadium, I'm less likely to pound another can of beer before entering the game. If I can buy a beer in the stadium, I might stick around longer instead of going back to the tailgate. Kent doesn't have the hard data to suggest binge drinking incidents have declined, but those in college athletics do see the benefits of having in-stadium sales beyond just the bottom line.
I don't know that there's actual data, but here are a couple of things that I remember that were kind of turning point moments. Coach Doran at NC State, he didn't like the fact that people were leaving the stadium at halftime to go outside and drink.
Yeah, pass outs.
And then not getting back in time for the beginning of the third quarter, and there's nobody in the stadium. He made that case pretty well. And I think some of the university presidents decided, hey, this is kind of a kabuki dance. Why are we allowing people to go in and out?
Yeah.
Why don't we keep them in here? And we'll get the money, by the way. So you found the UNC hierarchy getting behind this. Not just Carolina, not just NC State, but UNC Charlotte, East Carolina, and anybody else who was playing football.
So marketing opportunities. How much does it mean to NC State to have its own beer in a partnership with New Belgium, having Old Toffee? How much does it mean to App State, R&D Brewing? They call it Mountain Brew now.
Well, first of all, there's the sales at the point of sale. All right, that's pretty good profit if you're selling a beer for $6 or $7.
Yeah,
that doesn't cost that much to buy. Right, on the other end.
Let's not get into the real cost of a beer.
Okay, but secondly, I'm not privy to these contracts that were drafted.
Sure.
But depending on the wording and the language there, sort of the rights package, hey, it could be tens of thousands of dollars. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. It might be as much as $4 million, if not now, sometime in the not-so-distant future. It's that important to brewers to try to have that kind of presence. It's a marketing presence that it's probably worth every penny that they pay for it.
How much of the scene in North Carolina, which I've spent a good chunk of time talking about with another podcast that I do, the 919 Beer Podcast, how much is that scene in the growth of North Carolina as a beer destination change the general attitudes that we've seen at the universities?
Listen, North Carolina is a beer destination. You take a look at everything that happens with Asheville, Charlotte, and other cities across the state. People are coming here because there's a multitude of good breweries. Last time I checked, it's about 480, something like that.
Yeah, I've lost count.
But yeah, I think it's a better environment. But there's one thing that we've got to make sure that gets across. College football attendance went down in the last decade.
Yeah.
And some schools, I'm not saying UNC and others, some schools looked at this as a way to drive people back into the stadium.
It's amenities at that point. We talked about it from the jump. The Skyhawks failed because they were terrible. They were 0-10. The Skyhawks failed because people rejected a minor league football product. But people keep bringing up beer. They're convinced that at the very least, if they had sold beer at Carter-Finley Stadium for spring football, they might have been able to draw maybe 1,000 or 2,000 more people. It's the one thing, and I don't know if you've picked up on this, Tim, but you remember the Raleigh Ice Caps, right?
Of course I do. My daughter used to sing the national anthem there.
There you go. And when I had done a podcast episode as a part of this brief history of Triangle Sports series, the one thing that people routinely remembered was, and the beer was cheap. You might not know the hockey, you see some fights, but you remember cheap beer and some hockey fights. Yeah. You couldn't do that with the Skyhawks. I mean, I'm not saying the Skyhawks get saved, but clearly beer sales did matter at that point.
It's a cheap date.
Where do you see Triangle-specific schools? We're talking NC State, North Carolina, Duke. We'll throw in ECU and Wake Forest for good measure. Where do you see these relationships with alcohol going as they're trying to tap into more revenue streams? Are you looking at official beer sponsors? Are you looking at signage potentially at stadiums?
Yeah, probably corporate sponsorships. And I work in an industry where we try to maintain fair play and competition so that there are a variety of beers that are offered at a venue, whether it's a game or whether it's a bar. So there's going to be a little bit of push and pull within our industry to make sure that everybody has a chance for a level playing field within reason. But there's going to be corporate sponsorships, for sure.
Todd Turner is a name that you've heard a couple of times in this brief history of Triangle Sports about the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks. He was NC State's athletics director from 1990 to 1996, and then he left the Wolfpack to be the Vanderbilt athletics director from 1996 through 2003. Now he is the chairman and founder of College Sports Associates. I think he's uniquely positioned to understand where college athletics was in 1991 when the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks landed at Carter-Finley Stadium, and where college athletics is now. Turner has been a part of this business for over 40 years. He has seen and done a lot of things, but when I called him and asked him about the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks, it required some dusting of the memory banks.
Joe, I appreciate that question. The thing I can remember most is being excited about meeting Roman Gabriel, who was going to be the coach. But in all honesty, that was a long time ago. So the business components of that are pretty fuzzy in my mind. I know we were trying to be good citizens and supportive of the community. So to host the Skyhawks in the stadium, as best I can recollect, was not that big of a deal for us, at least financially or emotionally. What maybe gets to the root of the question is, though, how has professional sports and college sports, intermingled, and what was at the start of a trend that impacted the way we did business as colleges? And the answer to that's probably yes.
What's funny here is that you ended up having another experience with this when you went to Vanderbilt to be the athletics director, because the Titans come to town and they need a place to play. So how did that work out?
Well, at that time, they were, of course, the Houston Oilers, and they were looking at a place to move, and they moved to Nashville. There was no stadium, and so clearly the Vanderbilt Stadium, even though it was very small, was their best alternative. I think they played 1 year in Memphis before coming to Nashville, and during that interim period, we had a lot of pressure on us to negotiate a good deal for the by then they were the Titans, to have them play in our stadium. And I remember it was contentious because, again, the stadium was small. We were a private institution, but very much involved in the community. So I can remember multiple meetings with the mayor, with business leaders, putting significant pressure on us to cut a deal. And, the deal that they were trying to get us to do was, it needed work. But over time, again, trying to be supportive of our community, we did host them in Vanderbilt Stadium for a season. And it was a lot of stress on our staff and others, because we also played our own games there. So it was just an uncomfortable arrangement, but one that we agreed to do, mostly because it was good for Nashville.
You're at Vanderbilt at that time. You're a private institution, therefore you can operate the way you want to operate, versus when you were at NC State, which is a public institution, and you're kind of tied to a variety of other factors that play into it. So I'm curious, when the Titans moved and they played at Vanderbilt, did you sell beer?
I can't remember. My guess is we probably did not at that time, a long time ago. So I can't remember explicitly, but I probably would have remembered we had to clean up if we were selling it. So I don't recall that as being a big issue. Our concerns really were over our staff and running two events, of that size, at least one event a week on a Sunday, generally. I mean, it was just a lot of stress. I mean, parking was an issue. It had an impact on our campus and wear and tear on the stadium. And the financial deal was helpful, but it was not the driving force behind us wanting to do it. I expect that's the same thing in State. I mean, I don't think we were trying to host the Skyhawks to think we could make a lot of money out of it, because that's certainly not the case.
Well, no, certainly not the case, because it was actually the least attended World League of American Football franchise. When I go back and look up the old Greensboro News and Record or the News and Observer, there was one instance where they were so desperate to get fans that they tried to pull off a stunt where the Skyhawks were going to throw a party, and they had, I believe, 24 kegs of beer they were going to give out. You get like 2 tickets. Here's your free beer before you go into the stadium. They were positioning it as a corporate event, but NC State said no. I don't see you quoted any of this, but I do see some of your athletic administration support staff quoted, and it was a very hard line back in 1991 about colleges selling beer. Do you remember that time?
Yeah, vaguely, but I can tell you things certainly have changed.
They have. They certainly have.
They have. Yeah, my guess is that question probably ended up in our legal counsel's office to try to decide if, in fact, we were permitted to do that. But I just can't recall. I mean, again, it was a long time ago, and it was not something that sustained itself. So
money's going to win out over policy at the end of the day, right?
Well, unfortunately, I think you're right. And it's really changed college athletics. And the beer piece is just emblematic of the whole shift to being more corporate. And it's made its way into things like paying the students, for the name, image, and likeness, even huge media contracts by conferences. I mean, it's all revenue driven, and the outcome of that has been, I think, pretty detrimental to the basic premise of college sports, which is educationally based. And now it's a corporate entity with coaches making, some coaches making more than coaches in the NFL.
They are.
So it's just a really different world we're living in today than we lived in the early 90s.
So when you talk to college administrators now, or folks who have been doing it for a very long time, like you have, is there a lament that it's gone this way? Is it almost like now that it's out of the gate, you just might as well embrace it? Is that the current environment right now?
Well, I think for traditionalists and a lot of educators on campuses lament where it has gone. I hear more people disappointed with the trajectory, disappointed with the culture, but trying to survive, and by people, I mean college administrators, athletics directors, presidents, even coaches. I mean, it's just such a different world. Frankly, it's not nearly as much fun. And I do think it has harmed the industry as a destination for people who want to go and work. Now I'm in the executive search business, so we do a lot of work trying to help people hire folks. And there's more turnover in college sports, particularly at the entry levels, than ever before. And I think, maybe some of that's COVID related and people got accustomed to working at home and so forth. But the hours that you spend as a collegiate administrator are phenomenal. I mean, they're, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. It used to be fun because it was just games, and now it's a production. Now it's the fireworks and the smoke and mirrors and the promotions and tailgating, and which has all made it interesting, but it certainly is different than it was when I got into business. Gosh, 40 years ago, Joe. It's a long time.
You're not alone. Let me put it this way. You're not alone. When I've asked around about the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks, going to a college game in 1990, and I remember even as a freshman at NC State in 1997, going to a college football game was a very calm experience, right? I had a student ID. I'd roll up. I'd sit in the old end zone field that used to exist before the Murphy Center was built. And it was fun. It was, there's tailgating and things like that, but the tailgating culture wasn't what it is today. Versus now where, and I'm sure you talk about this with a variety of different college administrators and as you're hiring people, the experience they need to be in that position, you got to understand, all right, how's the Wi-Fi? What's the screen? What does the Jumbotron look like? How are the amenities? Because there's a decline in attendance too, because you have to compete with television. So when you talk to people now, what is the biggest concern of getting people to go to football games? It used to be, well, I just need a beer and I'm good. Now it's, I need all these things to get me to come to a college football game. How do you see that change?
Yeah, today it's more about the experience as opposed to the game. Once in a while you have a really important game and people are really focused on its outcome, but so much of it are the things that you just described. Can I get on my phone and text my friends, and can I watch replays? And eventually there'll be more virtual reality. And it's just moving in a totally different direction. That's society, man. That's just kind of where we are. And if you're going to be a college administrator today, you've got to be able to deal with that. I do think that, the global emphasis on the business of college athletics has really set into motion some things that are going to change college athletics greatly in the next 5-10 years. I think you're going to see a further separation of the schools like NC State and Carolina and Duke. The ACC schools, Big Ten, whatever, those Power 5 schools, they work in an entirely different environment than the Elons of the world or Davidson or, pick one. They're just totally different, even though they're all, quote, Division I schools. I just came from a project we were working on at Texas A&M where their facilities would put the NFL to shame. And I'm not talking about just their football facilities.
Right.
I'm talking about their softball program or their track and field. They've got $70 million track. And I think that's just where things are headed at the highest level. And there's huge business involved in that. You've got to make sure you're marketing yourself properly. Your media rights are lock solid. And then on top of that, students are wanting to be compensated now. And that really is, I think, going to change the way people look at college sports going forward. So it's definitely a different entity than it was when the Skyhawks walked into Carter-Finley Stadium, and I expect it'll continue to change.
I feel it's safe to say you do not have any Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks memorabilia in your office.
No, I don't. I do remember the colors were red and green.
Yes, red,
really
red, black, and
maybe
green.
Black.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was kind of cool. And they tried to tie in the First in Flight Wright brothers, and it was really kind of North Carolina centric. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, the cheerleaders were dubbed the Kitty Hawks. Get it? Get it?
I'd forgotten that. I didn't remember that.
Turner is certainly not alone when it comes to having a hard time recalling things about the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks. When I reached out to people to talk about the team, I got a lot of, I sort of kind of remember them. But you know what's wilder to me? The memory hole includes the inability to find good vintage merchandise. eBay, Mercari, local vintage shops like Father and Son or Trunk Show. As someone who avoids work by spending hours combing the internet looking for vintage ACC tournament t-shirts, finding authentic Skyhawks gear is rare. So where did it all go? In the next episode, we'll talk to the one person who might have the largest collection of Skyhawks stuff in the entire state. In the meantime, if you're enjoying this look back on the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks, you'll also enjoy other brief history of Triangle Sports episodes on some teams that were, including the beloved Raleigh Ice Caps, a minor league hockey team that played at Dorton Arena, sometimes in foggy conditions, and helped pave the way for the Carolina Hurricanes. A Brief History of Triangle Sports is written and reported by me, Joe Ovias. Doug Miller handles our final mix, and big shouts to Jason Jennings for digging up all that wonderful treasure inside the WRAL archives.